I tell everyone, I rent my title, I own my character. I don't want anyone to establish a relationship with me based on a rented title. I want it to have substance.
Let's be real. Retirement planning can seem, well, boring. 401ks, pensions, these just aren't things you talk about with friends or at dinner parties. Thasunda Brown Duckett is on a mission to change that. The veteran finance leader and former Chase executive is 3 years into her role as CEO of TIAA, a company synonymous with retirement planning. She's using her position to advocate for what's been labeled a retirement crisis. According to TIAA, the U.S. faces a $4 trillion retirement savings gap, with 57 million people lacking access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. But she knows the numbers aren't enough to spark a movement. To make a real difference, Thasunda focuses on the human impact of the retirement crisis. You can see this most clearly by how she works. She's a whirlwind of conversations inside TIAA, getting people to open up about their own stories about retirement as a way of helping them be motivated about the mission. Here's how Thasunda Brown Duckett ignites passion in her workforce. So you have been in finance for like 2 decades now. I would love to understand your path to getting into it and what has made you stay in this area.
Well, my dad, Otis Brown, would always say, people see your glory, but they don't know your story. And when I think about the path that I've stayed in, it goes back to the beginning of how I was raised and seeing my parents do their very best, even when their best was not always sufficient. I know what it's like to have food insecurity. I know what it's like to be long on love, but light on money. And I share that because what unlocked this passion was perspective, but then also access. There's a program called Inroads, and Inroads is a program for minorities that get them exposure into corporate America. So through Inroads, companies would decide, I'm looking for 1 intern or 10. And so Fannie Mae was looking for 1 intern. And a woman by the name of Valerie Manning went back to Fannie Mae and said, I found your intern. Fannie Mae said yes. And because of the power of information, because of the power of advocacy, and understanding life through the lens of Otis and Rosie Brown, it unlocked my passion. And so I started my career at Fannie Mae. I was there for a long time. And then I moved to JP Chase, and now the CEO of TIAA. All of it is connected to purpose for me. It's connected to helping the American dream come true. And I'll never forget this. When I graduated from college, I was at home with my parents, and for whatever reason, I looked at my dad's statement. And what really bothered me is that Otis Brown had access to a 401k. And at the time, he was probably working for his company for 30 years. He never contributed $1. And so to tell your dad that he did not have enough, but to know that your dad and your mom did everything that they could to provide for you, even when it was not sufficient, but to also know that he had access to something that could lighten our load was hard. And that moment is one that I will never forget, because now, being the CEO of TIAA that's so passionate about secure retirement, I get to think about Otis Brown every day. Do we see the Otis Browns in our jobs? Do we make sure the information reaches him? And do we connect in a way that he can receive it and know that it's for him?
And when you were at Chase and as you started the TIAA, how have you stayed in touch with these kind of personal stories?
I mean, when you think about helping people have better financial outcomes, it is all about the story and understanding people's human experience without judgment. And so the way you stay connected is to stay proximate. I remember when I was the CEO of Auto at JP Chase, and when I was just named, probably within the first 90 days, I went to the mailroom. CEOs typically don't go to the mailroom, right? There were all guys in there, and they looked at me, and I told them, thank you. And I said, the reason why I want to say thank you is that when you see us making progress on the client experience, when you see our company doing well, you played a role. Because when people pay their auto loan, you start the process. It doesn't accidentally go to the mortgage department or to a different department. And because you do your job with excellence every single day, it posts on time. These young men looked at me and said, "You're welcome, we got you." And so the reason why that was so important to me is because that's my dad.
Yeah.
And my dad mattered. Everyone plays a role. And so I will never, ever forget everyone that plays a role in helping me run a company, but also helping me to get sharper as a leader.
So how do you do that at TIAA? Is there a similar mailroom experience that you have there?
Yeah.
And then how do you get your leaders also to make sure that they're staying connected?
I'll give you two examples. One is what I call coffee and tea. People call me T, so coffee and tea. Coffee and tea is where it's always no more than 10 people. And the intentionality is that there's something in common with that group of 10. And so I bring them together and I always ask the first question, what would be the one thing that you're like, finally I get to be the CEO and I can get something done? And so just by asking that question, you immediately connect. And because it's only a group of 7 or 8, you always get voice. So if it's the executive assistants, I get to hear what's on their mind that I may not hear from any other job family. I actually have the ability to model the values that I want every employee to have and exude, which is voice, and I get sharper. And it allows me to never forget what's on the minds of everyday employees. And then the second piece that I'm very passionate about, and most companies have what we call business resource groups. Mm-hmm. Everyone can bring what is their identity that can pose vulnerabilities, different perspectives or headset, but you recognize that people do need to have a space where they can share what may be getting in the way or commonality. But why I love it is because you can get proximate to say, what is it about veterans that we're missing? What is it about new professionals early in their career? And what are they saying and what do they need? I get the through line through these BRGs, and I get to ensure that not only are you bringing a safe space for you to share your perspective, but others join too.
You've been the CEO for 3 years now.
Yes.
What are the biggest surprises to you about being CEO? What have you learned?
Well, every day I'm learning. There's just so much to learn. First, I tell everyone, I rent my title, I own my character. And I don't want anyone to establish a relationship with me based on a rented title. So I see everyone without judgment, and you have to earn it. I get to come in and I get to learn from everyone. I get to hear perspective. I don't have meetings, I have jam sessions. And I get to know what I don't know, but then I get to apply all that I have learned with everyone else's thoughts and insights to lead a company. But I also learned what has not changed is never losing the plot. And the plot is to make sure that people have a secure retirement and never forgetting that these people have names.
All right, I want to get into retirement, but I have to ask you first, what do you mean you don't have meetings, you have jam sessions?
So meetings, especially when you have this rented title, feels formal.
Okay.
We're going to jam. Put the rented titles away. There are no hierarchies. So calling it a jam session gets a smile. Meetings do not.
Right.
Calling it a jam session invites everyone to the table because we're all jamming. It's like music. The music comes alive when everyone's playing their instrument, when everyone's playing their part, and you start a vibe. I can just ask a ton of questions. I can push back, and you could do the same, and we'll come up with a better idea, a better solution, or we'll know with a sharper focus the problem that we need to solve.
Do you think they are able to say, oh, you're not the CEO, we're just jamming here? Like, don't you think the titles and the hierarchy is still in their mind somewhere? How do you get around that?
I have to make sure I'm doing my part to help people get comfortable, help people bring the best version of themselves to the table, their best ideas, their perspective, which means you're going to make a mistake, and that's okay. And in fact, I need to hear your feedback and what you have to say.
All right, let's talk retirement. We've been hearing about a retirement crisis forever
Yes.
in the U.S. This is not a new problem, but it feels like maybe it's going to get worse.
I believe that this crisis is even more of an urgent matter because if you recall in the 70s, for example, like my father, you at least had a pension.
Right.
That was guaranteed income that you would not run out of. You also had Social Security to complement that. You fast forward, 12% of Americans have a pension. We have 401k plans, but 401k plans historically did not give you access to guaranteed income. And so when I think about the problems we have today and what we can do, I would put it in 3 areas. There's an access gap. 58 million Americans don't have access to a workplace plan. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're working for a small business, you don't have access to the plan. We have a savings gap. So you might be contributing, but you're not contributing enough.
Right.
And so I think we have to make sure that it's easy for for people to save. For example, at companies, auto-enroll everyone. Auto-enroll everyone. I remember my first job, I was making $26,000 a year, and I maxed out. Why? Because on Friday, I made no money. On Monday, even after tax and after maxing out, it was more money than I've ever made in my life. That was my new baseline.
Yeah.
Everyone should be auto-enrolled, and you could opt out if you have an issue, and you need auto-escalation. So you may have started with $50 a week, but next year, just take them up 1%, take them up 2% until they can get to the max. And again, you have the ability to take it down, but studies show that when you auto-enroll, the opt-out rate is very low. When you auto-escalate, the opt-out rate is very low, but it's there because life be lifing, and sometimes you have to make adjustments. And what I worry about in an intergenerational environment, especially for people of color, that we're not transferring wealth, we're transferring debt. So we have to talk about retirement. We have to talk about it as early as when you get your first job. And we have to understand the intergenerational complications, especially when you have people living longer every single day.
And whose job is it to talk about these? As a manager, I've never talked to anyone who works for me about retirement or savings. Should managers be doing this? Whose job is this?
I think everyone plays a role, and let me tell you what I mean by everyone. First, policy matters. This is one of the few things that's done in a bipartisan way. It's something that impacts everyone. So we have to make sure that our elected officials stay connected. Secondly, benefit programs. Do we have them? How are they designed? But not just do you have them, what percentage of your employees are using it? Good plans should be defined by everyone consuming it. And if not, what do we do? And then when you ask about the manager, the storytelling becomes really important. 2 years ago, I suddenly lost my brother. And during my town hall, I talked about the importance of naming your beneficiary. That one step can make it a lot easier for the people you leave behind. From that moment, we saw a double-digit increase in people that added their beneficiaries.
Wow.
Because the reality is everyone is struggling, everyone has a problem, no one's life is perfect, and we have great benefits that can help lighten the burden.
I'd love to end these with career advice.
Yes.
What kind of advice do you give to people when they look at your path and your career and they say, I want to achieve what you've achieved? How do you tell people to get started? What's your best advice you give?
Be okay with hard. And I think, especially now, where there are so many opportunities that you can click and apply and stay in the market all the time, which is great. But just make sure along your career, especially early on, you sit in hard. Meaning, I may not have a manager that's amazing. Before I just immediately say, I'm going to leave, is there a lesson? Sit in hard. I may have peers that I don't get along with. Do I immediately try to opt out, or do I sit in hard and say, you know what, I want to hone my managing through influence skills. I want to hone how to overcome objections. Sitting in hard doesn't mean not protecting your mental, but I believe that if you sit in hard earlier in your career and you take some of the paths that are uncomfortable, you learn to be comfortable. Advocate your voice. Know that your voice is necessary and required. Stay curious. And never, ever lose your joy. Don't lose your joy in the process.
Here's what stood out to me. In a world where leaders focus on numbers and strategies, it's easy to forget that a crucial part of leadership is to inspire. Thasunda understands that to lead TIAA in solving the retirement crisis, her team needs to be deeply motivated and engaged. She crafted a vision that everyone can rally around, one where money is seen emotionally, not just analytically. To spread this message, Thasunda employs creative methods like jam sessions and mailroom visits, cutting through hierarchical barriers and fostering genuine conversation. By sharing her father's story, she shows her team the true impact of their work. This approach highlights how leaders who effectively share their vision and build empathy with their teams can drive profound business transformation. Now I want to hear from you. What ignites your passions at work? Let me know in the comments.